Other historical figures in the work: Bernard Barak, 1870 to 1965, financier and government advisor. As director of War Industries Board under Woodrow Wilson, mobilized nation's industrial resources for World War I, member of the White House Circle during Roosevelt administration, appointed by Truman as U.S. representative to the UN Atomic Energy Commission in 1946. Gregorio Ricci the Boot Boiardo, 1890 to 1984. Newark crime figure and local rival to racketeer Longis Wilman. His influence strongest in the city's Italian First Ward, where he owned a popular restaurant. Louis D. Brandeis, 1856 to 1941. Born in Louisville, Kentucky, to a cultivated immigrant Jewish family from Prague, public interest and labor attorney in Boston, early organizer of Zionist movement in America, appointed by President Wilson as Associate Justice of Supreme Court, but only after intense four-month controversy in Senate Judiciary Committee and around the country, where Brandeis attributed to his being first Jew nominated to the court. Served 23 years until 1939. Charles E. Coughlin, Roman Catholic priest and pastor of the Shrine of the Little Flower in Royal Oak, Michigan, regarded Roosevelt as a communist and fervently admired Lindbergh. In the 1930s, disseminated strongly anti-Semitic ideas in a weekly nationwide radio broadcast, and his periodical Social Justice, which was barred from the U.S. mail during the war for violating the Espionage Act, and ceased publication in 1942. Amelia Earhart, 1897 to 1937. In 1932, set transatlantic record of 14 hours and 56 minutes for flight from Newfoundland to Ireland. First woman to make unaccompanied flights across Atlantic and across Pacific from Honolulu to California. Her plane, lost somewhere over the Pacific in 1937, attempted to fly around the world with navigator Frederick J. Noonan. Meyer Ellenstein, 1885 to 1963. After careers as a dentist and a lawyer, chosen by fellow New York City commissioners in 1933 to be mayor of Newark. The city's first and only Jewish mayor, served 2 terms, 1933 to 1941. Edward Flanagan, 1886 to 1948. In 1904, immigrated from Ireland to the U.S., where he began studies for priesthood. Ordained in 1912, in 1917, to provide for the welfare of homeless boys of all races and religions, founded Father Flanagan's Home for Boys in Omaha, became national figure in 1938 because of popular film about Boys Town starring Spencer Tracy as Father Flanagan. Leo Frank, 1884 to 1915, manager of Atlanta Pencil Factory, found guilty of murdering Mary Fagan, a 13-year-old employee, on April 26, 1913, assaulted with a knife while prisoner and later forcibly removed from jail by local citizens and lynched. August 1915, anti-Semitism believed to have played an important part in dubious conviction. Felix Frankfurter, 1882 to 1965, Roosevelt appointed Associate Justice of U.S. Supreme Court 1939 to 1962. Joseph Goebbels, 1897 to 1945. An early member of the Nazi Party in 1933, became Hitler's propaganda minister and cultural czar, responsible for overseeing the press, radio, movies, and theater, and mounting public spectacles such as parades and mass rallies. Among the most devoted and brutal of Hitler's associates. In April 1945, with Germany destroyed and the Russians entering Berlin, he and his wife killed their 6 children and together committed suicide. Hermann Göring, 1893 to 1946, founder and first head of the Gestapo, or secret police, and responsible for creation of the German Air Force. In 1940, Hitler named him as his successor, but dismissed him near war's end. Convicted at Nuremberg for war crimes and sentenced to death, he committed suicide 2 hours before execution. Henry Hank Greenberg, 1911 to 1986, slugging first baseman for Detroit Tigers in 1930s and 1940s. Fell 2 home runs short of Babe Ruth's record in 1938. Hero to Jewish baseball fans, he was the first of 2 Jewish players elected to baseball's Hall of Fame. William Randolph Hearst, 1863 to 1951, American publisher, considered the foremost proponent of the sensational, jingoistic yellow journalism addressed to a mass audience, his newspaper empire flourished into the 1930s. Originally aligned with Democratic populists, became increasingly right-wing and a bitter enemy of FDR's. Heinrich Himmler, 1900 to 1945, Nazi leader, commander of the SS, which controlled concentration camps, and chief of the Gestapo in charge of racial purification programs, and second in power only to Hitler, poisoned himself and died after being captured by British troops in May 1945. J. John Edgar Hoover, 1895 to 1972, director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, originally the Bureau of Investigation, a subsidiary of the Department of Justice, 1924 to 1972. Harold L. Ickes, 1874 to 1952, a progressive Republican turned Democrat, served nearly 13 years as Roosevelt's Secretary of the Interior, making his the second longest tenure of any Roosevelt cabinet member, a dedicated conservationist, and an active foe of fascism. Fritz Kuhn, 1886 to 1951, German-born veteran of World War I, emigrated to America in 1927, and by 1938, as Bundeswehr, who considered himself the American Führer, had established the German-American Bund as most powerful, most active, and richest Nazi group in the U.S., with membership of 25,000, convicted of larceny in 1939, denaturalized in 1943, deported to Germany in 1945, in 1948 convicted by German denazification court of attempting to transplant Nazism to U.S., and of having close ties to Hitler, sentenced to 10 years of hard labor. Herbert H. Lehman, 1878 to 1963, a partner in Lehman Brothers banking house founded by his family, Lieutenant Governor of New York under Governor Roosevelt, succeeded Roosevelt as governor 1932 to 1942, New Deal supporter and strong interventionalist. As Democratic Senator from New York, 1949 to 1957, early opponent of Senator Joseph McCarthy. John L. Lewis, 1880 to 1969, American labor leader. In 1935, as president of the United Mine Workers, broke with the American Federation of Labor, AFL, to form the new Committee for Industrial Organization, which became the Congress of Industrial Organization in 1938. Initially a supporter of Roosevelt's, backed Republican Wilkie in 1940 election, and resigned CIO presidency after Wilkie's defeat. Strikes by UMW during the war led to further enmity between Lewis and the administration. Anne Spencer Morrow Lindbergh, 1906 to 2001. American author and aviator, born to wealth and privilege in Englewood, New Jersey. Her father, Dwight Morrow, a partner in the investment firm of J.P. Morgan & Co., and U.S. ambassador to Mexico during the Hoover administration, and a Republican senator from New Jersey, and her mother, Elizabeth Reeve Cutter Morrow, a writer and educator, and briefly, the acting president of Smith College, where Morrow received an A.B. in literature in 1928, introduced Charles Lindbergh the year before while visiting her family at the ambassador's residence in Mexico City. For details of Morrow's life after that meeting, see True Chronology, Charles A. Lindbergh. Henry Morgenthau, Jr., 1891 to 1967. Roosevelt appointed Secretary of the Treasury, 1934 to 1945. Vincent Murphy, 1888 to 1976. Meyer Ellenstein's successor as mayor of Newark, 1941 to 1949. Democratic nominee for governor of New Jersey in 1943, and dominant figure in New Jersey labor for 35 years after his 1933 election as Secretary-Treasurer of State Federation of Labor. Gerald P. Nye, 1892 to 1971, ardently isolationist Republican senator from North Dakota, 1925 to 1945. Westbrook Pegler, 1894 to 1969, right-wing journalist whose column, as Pegler Sees It, appeared in Hearst newspapers from 1944 to 1962. In 1941, won Pulitzer Prize for expose of labor racketeering, Fierce critic of Roosevelt's and the New Deal, which he characterized as communist-inspired and openly hostile toward the Jews. Close supporter and friend of Senator Joseph McCarthy, and advisor to McCarthy's investigating committee. Joachim Prinz, 1902 to 1988, rabbi, author, and civil rights activist, served as rabbi of Temple B'nai Abraham, Newark, 1939 to 1977. Joachim von Ribbentrop, 1893 to 1946, Hitler's chief foreign policy advisor in 1933 and Minister of Foreign Affairs, 1938 to 1945, with Soviet Foreign Minister Molotov signed 1939 non-aggression pact that included secret agreement to partition Poland. Pact opened way for World War II, found guilty of war crimes at Nuremberg, and on October 16, 1946, became first of the condemned Nazis to be hanged. Eleanor Roosevelt, 1884 to 1962, niece of Theodore Roosevelt, wife of her distant cousin, FDR, and mother of their daughter and 5 sons. As First Lady, made speeches for liberal social causes, lectured on the status of minorities and the underprivileged and women, spoke out against fascism, wrote daily syndicated column for 60 newspapers, and during World War II was co-chair of the Office of Civilian Defense. As UN delegate appointed by President Truman, supported establishment of a Jewish state, and, in 1952 and 1956, campaigned for Adlai Stevenson for president. Appointed again as delegate to the UN by President Kennedy, whose Bay of Pigs invasion she opposed. Leverett Saltonstall, 1892 to 1979, descendant of Sir Richard Saltonstall, an original member of the Massachusetts Bay Company who arrived in America in 1630. Republican governor of Massachusetts, 1939 to 1934. Republican senator, 1944 to 1967. Gerald L.K. Smith, 1898 to 1976. Minister and famous orator, allied first with Huey Long and later with Father Coughlin and Henry Ford, both of whom supported him in his unrelenting hatred of Jews. His anti-Semitic magazine, The Cross and the Flag, blamed the Jews for causing the Depression and World War II. In 1942, polled 100,000 votes in Michigan as Republican nominee for the Senate, maintained that Roosevelt was a Jew, that the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion was an authentic document, and after the war, that the Holocaust had never taken place. Ali Stoltz, 1918 to 2000, lightweight boxer from Jewish Newark, won 73 of 85 fights, losing 2 title fights in the 1940s. The first controversial 15-round decision to champion Sammy Angot. The second, leading to his retirement in 1946. A 13th round knockout to champion Bob Montgomery. Dorothy Thompson, 1893 to 1961, journalist, political activist, and columnist syndicated in 170 newspapers during the 1930s. Early foe of Nazism and Hitler, and bitter critic of Lindbergh's politics. Married to novelist Sinclair Lewis in 1928 and divorced in 1942. Opposed Zionism and supported Palestinian Arabs in 1940s and 1950s. David T. Willents, 1894 to 1988. New Jersey Attorney General, 1934 to 1944, whose prosecution of the Lindbergh baby kidnapping led to the conviction and execution of Bruno Hauptmann, later influential New Jersey Democratic organization and advisor to 3 Democratic governors of the state. Abner Longies Wilman, 1904 to 1959, Newark-born Prohibition-era bootlegger who was leading New Jersey mobster from the 1920s to the 1940s, member of East Coast racketeering Big Six, among them Lucky Luciano, Mayor Lansky, and Frank Costello. Extensive criminal activities exposed by Senate Crime Committee, televised hearings in 1951, committed suicide 8 years later.